Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. Several people are killed as large economic protests in Iran turn violent, with clashes reported in multiple provinces. State media says 3 protesters are killed and 17 injured in an attack on a police station in Lorestan. A fire rips through a crowded bar in Crans-Montana, Switzerland, killing around 40 people and injuring more than 100, police say. Swiss officials describe it as one of the country's worst tragedies as investigators work to determine the cause. Democrat Zoran Mamdani is sworn in as New York City mayor, vowing to push an agenda focused on making the city more affordable for working people. His left-wing victory, won last November, is seen as politically significant ahead of this year's US midterm elections. China says President Xi will host South Korean President Lee Jae-myung from Sunday, signaling a push to strengthen ties. It is their second meeting in 2 months, with Beijing emphasizing economic cooperation and tourism amid regional strains. Taiwan President Lee Ching-te says the island is determined to defend its sovereignty and boost defense as China steps up military pressure. He says the world is watching Taiwan's resolve after Beijing fired rockets towards the island during drills. Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of hitting civilians over New Year, with Moscow saying 24 people die in a strike on a hotel in occupied territory, while Kiev reports casualties from a broad air attack. The claim come as intensive peace talks continue under US President Donald Trump's oversight. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro leaves hospital after a week of treatment and returns to prison to continue his 27-year sentence for plotting a coup. This comes after the Supreme Court rejects his last request for house arrest as he is moved back under police custody. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's daughter, Joo-ae, makes her first public visit to the Kumsusan mausoleum with her parents. State media shows her in a prominent role as she continues to appear more frequently amid succession speculation. Those are the headlines for the hour, but we start this hour in Europe, where according to police, around 40 people were killed and at least 115 others injured after a massive fire tore through a crowded bar during New Year's celebrations at the luxury Swiss ski resort of Crans-Montana. Most of the injured remain in serious condition. Swiss authorities say the blaze broke out at a Les Constellation bar, packed with young revellers welcoming the new year. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but many victims suffered severe burns, making identification difficult. Swiss President Guy Parmelin described the incident as one of the worst tragedies in the country's history, saying the nation is in deep shock. Let's listen in.
L'incendie qui s'est produit la nuit dernière dans un bar de Crans-Montana constitue l'une des pires tragédies que notre pays ait connues. C'est avec une grande émotion que le Conseil fédéral a pris connaissance de cet événement et c'est en son nom que je m'exprime devant vous aujourd'hui.
The French Foreign Ministry confirmed that 8 French citizens remain missing and warned that French nationals could be among the dead. Investigators say there is no indication of arson at this stage, but inquiries are continuing. Vigils are being held as Switzerland mourns one of its deadliest peacetime disasters in recent years. Joining us now is Major General Sudhar Kaji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Tragedy hitting Switzerland over the new year, over 40 people killed with others in critical condition and others missing as well. Switzerland, of course, rarely deals with mass casualty civilian disasters like this. What does that say for the country's crisis response system after a disaster like this scale?
Thomas, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to your show. And To start with, let me wish you and everyone a happy new year 2026. Unfortunately, the tragedy had struck in such a devastating manner that it's beyond imagination. And I pray to God to bless the departed souls to rest in peace and the bereaved family be blessed with strength to bear the loss. Now, coming straight to the question, first and foremost thing is that what is the cause? From the open source, when I went through trying to investigate at my level, it appears that it is an accident. There is a bartender who was fixing a candle on the champagne bottle. That perhaps has uh, been the primary igniter. It was very close to the ceiling. That has actually been the primary cause as of now. But as things pass by, we may have to exercise patience and trust the investigating agency. But my take on the whole issue is look at the global scenario. And a few days back at Bondi, we have had a ISIS attack. And today, in entire Europe, I have traveled the length and breadth of Europe, if not all, at least major countries in Europe. The Muslim Brotherhood, I don't want to point a finger at a particular religion, but I'm trying to narrow down that the worst could be possible. Therefore, when you start the investigation, my way of looking at things is that always suspect, don't speculate, always suspect that possibly there could be a very devious angle of terrorism act in such kind of events, because it was a massive celebration, it was an international kind of an event, it was close to an international sports event, and fast ski event taking place about 2 hours from Bern. You could have had all kinds of international participants in this particular celebration. So therefore, don't discount this. And third and most important thing is what you are pointedly asking about the disaster management, the response matrix. I don't think I've gone, except for I think one odd country. I don't think they have a disaster management or response responders prepared to cater for such kind of challenges which are cropping up, because Europe is one of the countries after the peak of terrorism which was experienced way back in 90s and 2000, early 2000.
Okay.
Thereafter, I doubt, including America. Look at USA. What did it do when the Twin Towers were knocked off? Did it respond in any manner to prevent it? It had all the intelligence with it.
Okay.
Now, the first foremost thing which is coming to my mind is, did not the Swiss authorities have any kind of input? If they did not have, well, then you let the process of investigation go the way it is going. Back to you, Tom.
Major General G, of course, we don't know what the cause was. The police have not so far mentioned anything about the cause of the fire, but of course we'll continue to keep our viewers informed on that. And now we move on to our next story, and we stay in Europe. And Russia accuses Ukraine of attempting to strike a presidential residence belonging to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and has now shared what it calls proof with the United States. A senior Russian military official handed a US military attaché debris from a downed Ukrainian drone. Moscow claims the drone data shows it was targeting a presidential complex in Russia's Novgorod region. Russia says the attack involved 91 long-range drones and warns that it may reconsider its negotiating position in US-brokered talks on ending the Ukraine war. Russia and several Western countries strongly deny the claim, calling it disinformation. Apologies, Ukraine, of course, denies it, calling it disinformation. And Kiev says that Russia is trying to damage ties between Ukraine and Washington. Earlier, US President Donald Trump voiced concern, but later shared criticism of Russia's role in stalling peace efforts. Joining us once again is Major General G. Of course, Russia claims that Ukraine tried to strike this presidential palace. We don't know where Putin was at the time as of yet, but of course this came just a day after talks with Trump and Zelensky. How credible does this sound based on what we know so far about this incident, about Ukraine supposedly striking or trying to make some sort of strike on Putin's residence in Novgorod?
But interesting question. To my mind, my take on the whole issue is that it's absolutely credible. They have given one small piece of debris of a drone on which "Made in Ukraine" is embedded, or it is etched or written on it clearly. So they have given it to the military attaché of USA, who's serving in Russia. And the second one, which I think they have not given, is the memory of the navigation control. Now, those of us who have handled drone, they will understand. The mind will straight away go, you can manipulate anything, but you cannot manipulate the memory. The memory of the navigation control clearly states that presidential palace or the residence was at Novgorod was the target. So if that be the target, then who are the people who are firing? Obviously, you will not have unknown people. There would be some pilot who would have launched it. Maybe the question of range is coming. That means some people have infiltrated into Russia, close to Moscow, Novgorod, and in close proximity or at a distance, depending on the range of the drone, they have been launched. So therefore, to come down, so at the moment when you base your
Apologies to interrupt. Is this concrete proof, though? You're saying that this cannot be manipulated whatsoever, and that what the Russians have given the Americans, a piece of drone, is absolute proof that the Ukrainians targeted Putin's residence?
Absolutely, this is concrete proof from my side. But there is another angle, Thomas, if you allow. The other angle is manipulation, false flag operation. False flag operation, for all you know, it may have been planted by Russian people. You know, this is what Ukrainians may be thinking, or the Western alliances, that they might have planted it in a manner so that the talk between Zelensky and Trump, because this incident took place when the talk was in peak at Florida, when the talk was going on across the dining table, they are having dinner, I think. This is highly possible. Also, it is possible that the deep state within America and the Europe as a union, as a country, NATO forces, they together, they do not want any kind of peace. They want the war to carry on. Let anything happen, because the defense industry will dry up. The Europe's existence will be in question. They also have to survive. Look at the indications. The UK has gone in for the partnership, a strategic partnership with Ukraine for 100 years, January last year, 2025. And look at the commitment and the assurances given by other countries, despite the fact their own defense industry is in doldrums. So therefore, what I'm saying is, it is highly possible that a false flag could have taken place, unless it is ruled out, which I don't think. In my opinion, it has not taken place. Otherwise, Putin, going by his neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, I'm an NLP expert. I study body language. I look at the language and the words used. 3 minutes articulation, and he has spoken everything except for the peace talk. Okay, so these are all clear. He's now very very disturbed. He's going to play mayhem. You know, he's going to come down with a heavy hammer against Ukraine, because he doesn't require any support from anybody, any approval from anybody. So these are the issues one has to be very mindful of when a peace proposal of the nature which has been mooted and formulated by Donald Trump and his team, and it has gone crisscross to multiple stakeholders. Finally, it is gaining some kind of a shape and direction. These kind of things should be prohibited, and I think there is a dirty hand of Ukraine involved in this, so as to sit as the peace talk. Back to you, Thomas.
Major General G, as always, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you here on NewsX World. We now move over to the United States for our next story, and Democrat Zoran Mamdani is sworn in as New York City's mayor, has announced a slate of executive actions aimed at expanding housing affordability and strengthening tenant protections. Mamdani has issued 3 executive orders designed to address the city's housing crisis. The measures revive the mayor's office to protect tenants, establish a land inventory task force to accelerate housing development, and create a task force to streamline permitting processes for new construction. Mamdani, who campaigned heavily on cost of living issues, reiterated his focus on holding landlords accountable and cutting bureaucratic red tape to boost the supply of affordable homes. Let's take a listen in to the New York City mayor.
Today, we are announcing 3 executive orders. The first will be to revive the mayor's office to protect tenants. We will not compromise on housing quality. If your landlord does not responsibly steward your home, city government will step in. We will make sure that 311 violations are resolved, and we will hold slumlords to account for hazardous and dangerous threats to your well-being. The second is to create a LIFT task force. LIFT stands for Land Inventory Fast Track, to leverage city-owned land and accelerate housing development. The task force will review city-owned properties and identify sites suitable for housing development no later than July 1st of this year.
In his remarks, Mamdani also referenced broader national economic concerns, including criticism of Republican President Donald Trump, whose approval ratings have declined over the past year amid ongoing economic pressures. Joining us now is Ross Feingold, a political analyst, and he joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Of course, Ross, you grew up in New York City. What does Mamdani's approach differ? How does Mamdani's approach differ from prior New York mayors? And do you think realistically all his measures are going to work?
It's a really interesting question, but keep in mind that the vast majority of voters in New York City are liberal or even can call them progressive. That's why he was elected. But it's not the first time there's been a very progressive mayor in the last 30 or so years. In the late 80s, early 90s, excuse me, Mayor Dinkins was also a self-described democratic socialist. Mayor de Blasio, who had 2 terms in recent years, was also very progressive. So we've kind of been there before. We've seen this approach where a new mayor says, I'm going to do a lot for housing costs, I'm going to do a lot for child care, health care, I'm going to help new immigrants, but it's very difficult to achieve those goals. So getting to your second question, he's going to find that it's easy to talk about these things, but actually implementing them is extremely difficult. He's referred to his initiatives with regard to, frankly, cutting red tape to build more housing. But the red tape is enormous. There's only so much the city could do to speed up the permitting process. There's local community boards that have a say in these things. There's environmental regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So how much additional housing stock or affordable housing stock he could bring online in a reasonable, quick period of time is going to be really difficult.
Indeed. And Ross, of course, this comes as there are midterms approaching in the broader United States. Donald Trump, of course, and his Republican Party are declining in popularity when it comes to their approach to the economy. If Zoran Mamdani does indeed improve the livelihoods of New Yorkers, do you think that could be a new outlook that the entire country will be watching to where they vote in the midterms?
The reality is that as poor as the Republicans or Donald Trump's approval ratings have been recently, Democrats' approval ratings not very good either. If they do well in the midterms, it's simply because voters decided they're angry at the Republicans. It's not because they like the Democrats that much. Now, definitely Democrats across the country will be running on affordability, this same word that Mamdani used successfully. Democrats across the country will use this same word. The problem is that in recent years, when they have been in governance, whether at the local, state, or national level, such as the first 2 years of the Biden administration, when the Democrats controlled the White House as well as the House and the Senate, Democrats have governed too far to the left. And America is still generally a centrist country, especially once you get out of the big cities, or one could even say it's center-right. So the Democrats' big problem, and the voters know this, is that they tend to govern too far to the left. And they focus on a lot of other non-core issues that the voters come to reject. And that's why Trump won and the Republicans took control of the House and the Senate in last year's, the 2024 election. So the Democrats will talk about affordability, but the voters will also be skeptical that the Democrats might want to do a lot of other stuff that the voters don't want.
Ross, do stay with us as we move on to the Indo-Pacific for our next story. Chinese President Xi Jinping will host South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on a state visit starting on the 4th of January, a move widely seen as Beijing's effort to strengthen ties with Seoul amid rising tensions with Japan over Taiwan. This visit comes just 2 months after Xi and Lee last met, an unusually short gap that highlights China's urgency to deepen political and economic cooperation with South Korea. Analysts say Beijing wants to boost trade, tourism and strategic engagement at a sensitive regional moment. Relations between China and Japan remain strained after remarks from Tokyo suggesting a Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt a military response. Against that backdrop, China appears keen to engage Seoul before Lee holds further talks with Japan. President Lee's administration has said it wants to restore relations with Beijing, noting China remains South Korea's largest trading partner. Seoul now seeks a careful balance, aiming to cooperate with China while avoiding deeper regional confrontations. Joining us once again is Ross Feingold. Ross, what exactly does China want from South Korea in these talks? What's going to be the top of President Xi's agenda?
Certainly trade, and why that's important is we see so many countries adding restrictions of various kinds to their trade relationship with China, whether that's restrictions on the exports of certain technology or specific kinds of semiconductor chips or semiconductor manufacturing equipment, or it's restrictions on inbound investment from China. So certainly China's message will be we're a dependable trade partner, which is the opposite of the message that South Korea would hear from the United States, of course. The United States would say, reduce your dependency on trade with China. So China's going to say the opposite. We're a dependable trade partner. We should be expanding the relationship, not putting additional restrictions on. So anything China could do to keep South Korea from being fully on board with trade restrictions on China, that would be a good outcome from the Chinese perspective. Of course, they'll talk about North Korea as well. South Korea will look to China to put some pressure on North Korea to try to reduce tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Whether or not China is willing to do that or will be successful in doing that, that's a big if, because even if there's some short-term reduction in tensions, history tells us that Kim Jong-un will always decide at some point in the future to increase those tensions. And then you mentioned Taiwan. South Korea under new President Lee has not been an outspoken supporter of Taiwan the way Japan has been under new Prime Minister Takaichi. And that's probably not going to change, but China would still bring this issue up just to make sure that South Korea is not going to go down the road of Japan and make public statements that are supportive of Taiwan that China dislikes.
Ross, do you think there is urgency in Beijing after the war games in the Taiwan Strait and, of course, these heightened tensions with Takaichi to keep regional cooperation?
The reality is China's pretty good at that. Their foreign minister, even though they had changes at the foreign ministry and Wang Yi came back because the previous guy was removed for corruption, but the resources and the effort and the energy that China puts into its relationships with the ASEAN countries, with the Pacific Island countries, and with Korea, obviously not with Japan because there's tensions in that relationship. But China is always on top of this, and that's something that the United States, frankly, struggles to compete. We often hear that criticism of the United States. You come in, you don't stay long, the president makes a short visit, you're not really here on the ground the way China is. And the U.S. has successive presidents and their secretaries of state have tried to address that and say, no, we really are here. We are your trusted partner. It shouldn't be China. But we constantly see commentary coming out of these countries in the region here in the Asia Pacific that China is really very active diplomatically, and the U.S. needs to really do its best or do better to keep up with that.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. That's all that we have time for this hour, but keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.